We are here. It's October 30th. My name is Paul Ortiz. I'm interviewing Shirley Bloodworth and for the Samuel Proctor Oral History Program at the University of Florida. Shirley, first of all, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to talk with me this morning. And I wonder if we could start with your kind of earliest years, and as best as you want to talk about them, kind of where you grew up, where your family was from, and what life was like as a young person.
Right. Well, I have done my life in decades before and related myself compared to what was happening in the world at the time. And it's interesting. I was born in 1929, just as the stock market was crashing. And so I grew up in New York City. I was born there. I lived in Brooklyn most of my life, but my parents were from Nova Scotia, Canada. And as I look back on it now, I don't know how they managed the shock they must have felt moving from a tiny village in Nova Scotia to New York City. He left high school to become a cable operator. England put a cross-Atlantic cable from the furthest point on the US continent, on the American continent, and that happened to be the town he was growing up in. He left high school to become a cable operator. And he did very, very well, so they transferred him to Broad Street, New York. He got married and came here with his wife, my mother. And this shock, the cultural shock, must have been one terrific adjustment. So we lived in Brooklyn near Prospect Park. I was born, of course, much quicker than my mother would have ever wanted. She thought she could go to school in New York and learn a lot about New York. And then suddenly I was there. She adjusted to my arrival, I guess. She had to learn how to make formula. She had to go find somebody who would show her that. So it must have been quite a shock. She became number 34 at Margaret Sanger's clinic because she was not going to have that happen again without control, if possible. So she was a forward-moving character to begin with. So my parents had lots of difficulties, and when I graduated from high school, matter of fact, I went to James Madison High School. That's where education is the true foundation of civil liberty, by the way, Paul. And it's the same high school that Bernie Sanders went to, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg, and also Chuck Schumer. They all graduated from the same high school. So, you know, the crowd I was in, it was a very Jewish community. And during the Jewish holidays, there was just a few of us at school. So I learned to be very involved with the Jewish community way, way back then. And it's a fantastic group of people. So anyhow, I left home. I decided that was what I needed to do. And I went into nurses training. I went to Long Island College Hospital, where you lived at the nurses' home, and went into the 3-year, it was kind of an apprentice program. It was a great nursing learning experience, really. And graduated in 1950. And it was time to go to work then. And I didn't want to move back home, so I decided to move to Florida. I had a buddy that I had known earlier, and she had come to Gainesville. So I contacted her, and she said she had a bed in her rented room, so I came on. I left New York in a blizzard. My parents took me to Grand Central Station. Before I left, I got a telegram return that the person I was contacting that I was arriving was not available, not locatable. Should I leave or should I not? Well, I left. And I got off the train in Jacksonville. The sun was shining. I knew I'd made the right decision. So anyhow, I worked at Latchwood General Hospital before it was air conditioned at night. What an experience that was, trauma written all over that. And then when I'd been here for a while, I applied at the infirmary, and I worked at the infirmary for a while, which was a very interesting experience. The building adjacent to it was the nurses' home. It's an administration building now, I think. But we lived there, and I had most fantastic time, great roommates. It was a wonderful experience. And I started going to classes. It was when the GIs were back. There were 5 men to every woman. It was a very romantic campus, I want to tell you. We used to have concerts on the Plaza of America, and we take our blankets and go watch the moon, the palm trees. It was lovely. But anyhow, I met my husband in a philosophical class, and we fell quite in love. He was in the process of finalizing a divorce, didn't quite work out. We separated. I went to Shreveport to a friend that I had worked with at the infirmary. She was joining the Air Corps, and she was in Barksdale, and I joined her. And eventually Tommy found me. He said, this has got to be. He was in love, and I dearly loved him. And we married in Texarkana, Texas in 1953. Am I going too fast?
No, no,
It
I don't have to write it out.
it all happened very quickly. And we were so poor, for an evening's entertainment, we would go buy a candy bar or buy some cigarettes or something like that, you know. And he worked at Shreveport, Sears and Roebuck, and I worked at the Memorial Hospice in Shreveport and helped them transport patients to the newly built Memorial Hospital. It was a real experience. I worked with children's infectious disease and carried them on ambulances to the new hospital. Eventually, I became nursing director of the medical surge unit at that hospital. So I had
Shirley, now, when you say Shreveport, that's in Louisiana.
Yeah.
Okay, just to make, yeah, clarify. Okay.
Yes. Shreveport.
Yeah, there could be a Shreveport, Florida. In
No.
oral history, they teach us never assume.
Right. There's lots of Gainesville too. So we started out stormy, you know, being poor. I could make a can of sardines go for 3 meals. You know, you do what you have to do, and it was a great learning, loving experience. So then we decided to come back, and Tommy went back to school. He got his master's degree. He was a psychology major. And then we moved to Jacksonville. He became the sales manager for Seal Test. And I went to work at State Farm in Jacksonville. I became the nurse for the organization, traveled all over Jacksonville. And my daughter was born there in 1959. As a matter of fact, she was born the day of the Georgia-Florida game, 64 years ago. But it happened to be on November 7th that year, but they lost then too. So as I was having contractions, my husband was watching the game, and it was a great beginning for her. She and I have a wonderful relationship, much different than my mother's and mine. And she really is quite a remarkable person. So anyhow, Tommy went to work there in Seal Test, and we stayed in Jacksonville for several years. We moved to St. Petersburg. He became sales manager of Cheesham's Ridgewood Retirement Village. So way back then, I learned about retirement villages. It was interesting. And I worked at Minneapolis Honeywell, which was in Largo, Florida, just north of St. Pete. Very big experience there. The union was trying to break in. Very difficult experience for the employees, for the union. Very aggravating for the administration, and they showed it. So anyhow, then we decided we were coming back to school. He got his master's degree, and I worked up here for General Electric out here in The Hague. You remember when it was out there? Out 441?
Oh, yeah.
And I was one of the very first nurses there. I did manual testing and got to know what was going on there. As a matter of fact, I understand GE came here. We had very low wage employees, and the union tried to work in out there. It was a very disruptive time. Slashed tires in the parking lot. It was a fight. It was a fight. And anyhow, I decided then I was going back to school too. My husband became associate personnel director at the university, and he worked there until he retired. He was one of the, it's called HR now. It used to be personnel. He was one of the good guys in personnel. He tried to help people, help people get done what they wanted to get done. As a matter of fact, everybody talked to my husband. Everybody loved him. Great guy, great guy. And so then I finished I went back to school and ended up going back to nursing school. I was really a very experienced nurse by this time, but I had to wear student uniform. It was just the early years of the College of Nursing. They didn't know how to handle nurses. They wanted to have a new brand of nurse. So it was very, very difficult. It was a very schizophrenic experience for myself. It was a dishonest experience for me to be a nursing student in a nursing student uniform and a skilled nurse at the time. And the students all asked me questions. I probably had more experience than any of the instructors. So I fought that, and finally we got through with that. I graduated. I got a master's in psych nursing. The years that I went, I had to promise 2 years to return to teaching in the state to repay for my master's degree. It was the shortage of nurses. The government was paying tuition then. I think they will probably do it again because of the shortage of nursing. But I taught down in Central Florida, Ocala Junior College. And I taught nursing down there, and I took students to Anclote Manor, which is a private psychiatric institution in Tampa. I don't know whether you knew it or not. It's closed now. That was an awesome experience to take maybe 20 students to live in the town where you started to work at a psychiatric. We all had symptoms. There was no doubt about it. It was hard to separate us from the inmates by the time it was over. But it was a very great learning experience, and I wouldn't swap it for a dime. As a matter of fact, I don't think I've said I have a happy life. I have had the most wonderful life. For whatever reasons, it has happened to me, and I am fully aware of it and thankful for it. I wish everybody could be as happy as I've been. Wow. How do you get happy? I don't know, Bob, but I am happy. But anyhow, I was offered a job at the university, College of Nursing faculty, adjunct faculty position to run the Clinical Research Center. That's CRC, which was a NIH-sponsored, grant-sponsored spot in Shands Hospital on the 6th floor. It was originally started by Dr. Billy Thomas. The name Billy Thomas is legend in this town. As a medical instructor, they used to call him Barracuda Billy. He was fabulous, right? And so I worked there until I retired. I worked there from 1968 until 1980. In the meantime, my husband's son from his previous marriage, who grew up in California, he came to live with us in Gainesville from California, surf buddy. It was an interesting experience to become a stepmother to a teenager. And we developed a fine relationship. He still tries to manage me and care for me. And Tommy, my husband's father's wife died, and he went to Georgia to the funeral and found his father very ill. So he brought him back to Gainesville. So we had 3 Thomas Hardwick Bloodworths in the same house that did not know each other while I was working on my master's. I was glad I was working on my master's. But it was a very unusual experience. They had each gotten divorced when the child was about 2 years old, so neither of them knew each other at all. His dad used to try to ask me to explain him to my husband. I can't explain you. You've got to have your own relationships. This is tough. But it was like an old Georgia guy, a California surfer, and our generation in the middle. It was really interesting, right? So anyhow, moving along, young son, I've called.
Really, if I could stop you for a sec, because of your trajectory in terms of the work that you've been doing the last several decades, what were the attitudes towards aging back then? And how was it different back then? Because you mentioned this intergenerational mix.
I don't think I was aware of it, but I got very, very aware of it shortly. As a matter of fact, I mentioned I left home when I was 18. My parents did go ahead and get divorced. I had one brother, 5 years younger. I was his babysitter. That was my job when he came along. So anyhow, they got divorced and they each remarried. And eventually they all came to Gainesville for me to take care of them. My mother's husband also brought his brother, who was a Section 8 discharged from the service. And they all came to Gainesville for me to take care of them as they got older. And I spent 25 years caring for parents in the prime of my life. It was a real tough go. But I lived through it. It was, I managed it. I have learned that it is not healthy to take your parents into your own home. And I'm glad we did not do that. When I was working on the Clinical Research Center, my husband and I, both confrontational jobs all the time like this, we decided we're going to be independent. So we bought a farm. We bought a farm out toward Newberry. It was the best experience of our lives. We worked so hard. We worked from dawn till dusk. The nature never finishes pruning. We had cows. We had 12 acres. We had 12 cows. We had our own garden. We could see the difference in our personality. I would put down a bunch of seeds like this, and he would put one seed in each hole. And I say, can't we talk while we're doing this? And he said, definitely not. We have to measure how deep to put the seeds. So we learned our differences. We had a lot of premarital agreements. We always protected each other's ego. We never hit each other below the belt when we were arguing. We tried to always argue about what was the topic that we were concerned about and not bring up everything that was always overwhelming. And we were both psychologically aware enough that we made these rules and we loved them and we lived by them. We had a wonderful marriage. We were very in love the whole time. So on the farm, we were very in love. And the tasks that we undertook were just wild. He would steer some of our own cows. And he would say, Shirley, hold these back legs while I do this job on this guy. Well, there's no holding and steers back legs. We had such funny experiences. And as I look back on it now, I'm sure we were the joke of Newberry. We did everything the hard way, everything. We bought cows at the farmer's market. One was very sick on a Thanksgiving Day, and we didn't know what to do with it. We got my daughter and Tommy and I, my daughter's name is Beverly, pushed this little calf onto a plastic tablecloth and put it in the back of our GTO. That was the only car we'd had starting out on the farm. And I convinced my dog's veterinarian to meet us. He said, I am not a large animal. I said, we just got you to see this animal. So we drove to the veterinarian and he grabbed the cow by the tail, pulled it up, and the cow stepped out of the back of the car. He said, this is the way you make a cow stand up. We kept trying to make its front legs do something. We didn't know anything about the stuff. I was from New York. My husband was from Atlanta. He was from a very well-known family in Atlanta. Matter of fact, he left Atlanta because he felt like he could never be himself. He was always who he was related to in Atlanta. That's the old Atlanta culture, who his family was. So anyhow, he left. He had moved to Jacksonville. His family had moved to Jacksonville before the war. He graduated from Robert E. Lee early, right after Pearl Harbor, so he could go into World War II. So he was a World War II veteran. He had gone to Africa and up to Sicily and up through Italy, wounded several times, several Purple Hearts. Had lots of, they called it battle fatigue back then. It's gone through several names, this post-traumatic stress business. He had battle fatigue, I'm sure, several times in the hospital. He would relate funny things. He had a wound in his ankle. They discharged him from the hospital, sent him back to the front, told him to soak his leg 3 times a day with salt water. At the front was a joke. We're just giving you the information that you should have, right? I see some of that happening today, right? So anyhow, so he was very insightful too about himself as a soldier. Looking at death, he understood a lot about life. So when I retired from hospice, and we had this farm, and when I retired from the university, we had this farm and everything. I learned how to retire. I retired several times now. The first one was a shock. And I learned from Bob Bryant. I don't know whether you remember who he was at the university. I heard a lecture in one of the nursing student graduations. He said, be so careful. You become professional people and you think you are the job. You've got to remember you are the person. You are your own person doing that job. And you can be replaced. Well, when I retired from the CRC, to show you how hard it hit me, just a funny, okay? When I went to Publix to buy groceries, you always used a check back then, and they always asked you to put your employee work phone number on it. And the first time after I retired, they asked me to put that on it. And the fact that I retired was slap dab in my face. I made up a phone number, a work phone number. That was the way I adjusted to it. And I thought, wow, you've got to look at this harder, Shirley. Look what you're doing here. Making up a phone number to put on a check because you're not employed anymore. So I went back to school. I did some work in counselor education. I did not get another master's degree. I didn't want that. And then I went to work for Haven Hospice. And I had a second career with Haven Hospice. I learned an awful lot there, well, more than I learned in the hospital. Hospitals are all about survival. One more test, one more treatment, one more trial. Don't die. One more treatment, one more test. We can do this. I learned with working for hospice, that's not really life. Life is a circle. You are not going to survive it. And I have been working hard to try to change some of the medical attitude about if a person decides not to continue treatments, the medical community considers them quitters and losers, and that's the impression the families get. If a person decides not to become a medical victim and take charge of their lives, they are a winner. They have taken control and know that they want to do the most that they can do with the rest that's left and not just go through symptom management. I have seen some remarkable people take control of their lives and not become medical victims. It's a real experience. People don't understand that well enough.
Shirley, when you first went to Haven Hospice, what were some of the first things that were kind of eye-opening for you based on your earlier experiences? You mentioned the different cultures, different attitudes. But can you talk about like your early, like what were some of the early like wake-up calls at Haven Hospice for you?
Well, the idea that a person could make choices about their life at the end of their life. And all I knew was survival. I remember back in New York, me and a resident standing on an old woman's chest trying to do CPR and looking at each other saying, what the hell are we doing? That was back in early 1950. But when I went to work for Haven Hospice, it was down right on the water, Bivens Arms, a little tiny office, way before Haven moved to York. That was a heavy lift, by the way. And people who were referred to hospice did not come to hospice or were not ready for hospice. They were throwing out their files. They had no room. And I started saving those. And I started calling those people. And it became crisis management that I appreciated so much because of my change of take on what hospice was. And I realize now that it takes almost a brain transplant to stop doing all the things you tried to do all your life, like be proactive about your health, take your vitamins, take supplements, do what you need to do, exercise. This is what you tried to do your whole life. And suddenly, this is not your important thing anymore. You're going to take care of things like relationships, where you are in this life relative to your own life. What legacy do you want to leave? How do you want your life to end? And what controls might you have? It's a fantastic experience. The education is not out there yet about it. Even though I'm trying to change that attitude about one more test, one more survival. It won't happen because it didn't happen in medical school. So anyhow, where was I?
Talking about the impact of Haven Hospice.
Oh, yes. So I started saving these and then I started calling the people, found out it was really crisis management for people's lives. they were still caught up in this medical society. And I remember one woman called me. She said, my husband was told he had brain cancer. There's nothing more they can do for him, except this one doctor said he could refer him to a radiologist. And he went to the radiologist. I went with him. He said there would be a 15% cure guarantee. And my husband is so excited. She said, that's 85% failure that he doesn't hear that I hear. What should I do? How do I handle this? It was crisis management. And there were many cases just like that. And so I continued with the Bridges as we got the money and everything moved to the T. York Hospice. And I continued that program and working weekends and going, making visits and stuff like that. Quite an experience working with hospice. And it was transferred, it became the transitions program because there were insurances around this transitions program that was legislated at different hospices. What I was doing was kind of on my own, and there were no, if I didn't give good advice, what, but the transitions program was insured, and that became the program that a hospice was using after that. But that was still the same process, only with better guidelines to it instead of my own freebie. So I eventually retired from hospice. And when I did, Jackson Sasser was president of Santa Fe, and I was invited to start the Primetime Institute there. So I developed the Primetime Institute Lifelong Learning at Santa Fe Community College after I retired a second time. And that was a fine experience. We had a great following after a while. It was a membership thing. It was a win-win for Santa Fe, not a big win, but after about 4 or 5 years, they told me they no longer had funding for it. So the people that were members of the Primetime Institute were furious. They insisted that we speak to the president and have him come to a meeting, and they really didn't want to leave it. It made me realize just how valuable lifelong learning is to people, seniors. If you stop learning, you might as well be dead in the water, I think, really. So I retired from there, and I've been retired till I went to work for the College of Medicine. I'm a citizen scientist with the translational program now. I think I started working there like in 2016, part-time OPS, but I review research proposals, see whether they're community related and how to help volunteers understand them and stuff like that. That's been a very interesting program. So my daughter got married in 1960. She has 3 beautiful children. My son went to Vietnam, came back, had a chaotic life for a while, married, had a wonderful daughter. He got divorced. She now lives in Savannah. She's the activities director for SCAD, Savannah College of Art and Design. She's got a wonderful career. She's a wonderful young woman. And they have a campus in Paris. She goes there periodically, and to Atlanta from Savannah. It's a very interesting, it's a crazy college with a wonderful product. Very, very interesting people come through there. She's married to a fellow that graduated from there who is a videographer for NBC News now. And they have a daughter. She has a daughter who will be 15 this year. So I have a great-granddaughter.
Wow, cool.
3 generations, right? So my daughter has 3 children, and they're living in Jacksonville. She's married to a lawyer who has his own firm, and they are thinking retirement. They have an Airstream. They think they're going to travel. But he has a mother and dad who are both ill and in different institutions now getting care. This aging thing is on their plate right now. I'm trying to behave and be as good and careful as I can be so I don't add to the plate. But what am I leaving out? When my husband died in 2007, he was in the hospital for 11 days. He had a heart attack. I was in Jacksonville. My son-in-law was supposed to have surgery. I was up there to take care of the kids and got a call that Tommy was in the emergency room having cardiac cath. So I came back and pushed right away. And he had a stroke in that event, and he was in the hospital for 11 days. But we knew each other very well. I knew what his desires were. He did not want to live in any kind of an incapacitated state. He was already ready to be finished with what he was doing. He became very involved in hobbies, photography, remote control airplanes flying around was very interesting. But he didn't want to live life in an incapacitated, so I was sure that his wishes were followed. It was a hell of a difficult time. And when he died, family just cocooned me. I was in a fog for days, you know. We had a celebration of life for him, getting teary-eyed. Look at me. Oh, celebration of life for him at 43rd Street Deli. He had a wonderful turnout, wonderful group of people. And we have his ashes are at a little place in the Gulf, Tommy's Mound. It's marked by his son on the GPS where it is. And he was empowering. My husband was very empowering. And so I was able to move on. And I actually learned through the University of Florida that how you memorialize who you lose makes a difference as to how you move forward. They have a whole program about that. So I carry with me pictures that are very meaningful to me. Pictures of my happy life with him. He had a wonderful sense of humor. I have a picture in Jacksonville's airport when we just came back from Mexico that he was saying something so funny, and you can tell that I was hysterical. My daughter took a picture. And, you know, that is the memory. When we sold the farm, we moved to a retirement village rather than back to the suburbs. Am I going too long, Paul?
No, not at all.
Rather than back to the suburbs, because we wanted to travel. We always wanted to travel. So right off the bat, we went to Greece, we went to Africa, we went to China, we went to Mexico, and had great, great travels. And that was my memory of him. The first car we owned, I carry a picture of that, was an Alfa Romeo convertible. It was a two-seater, very low to the ground. You could strike a match and light a cigarette when you're driving. But when I got pregnant, there was no room for a third, so we sold it and got a different car. I tell people now, and are looking back at it, I could write my life relative to the cars I have been involved in. And I bet everybody could, because that's the way you can think about what was going on at the time you had that car. It's very interesting, right? So we traveled a lot. And after he died, I became friends with Sharon Ferris. I don't know whether you know Sharon. Who's Sharon? She had worked with the army in Germany for years. She had grown up here in Gainesville. And we had a group that we traveled with. We went around the world, went back to South Africa, had wonderful times traveling and revisiting life again and understanding more about where we are. So now I have been very involved in the senior center. I was part of the group that encouraged us to tax ourselves to build the center here in Gainesville. And of course, it was built. There were no operating funds, so it's got rental space in it for elder care. And so the prime time, after it had to close at Santa Fe, was adopted by the senior center eventually, and it's run by volunteers there now. But I was part of CCOA before that, and that's the Community Coalition for Older Adults. And it's the educational arm of the senior center, really. And so I've done many, many programs. They've sponsored lots of programs there, done weekly programs on civics before Trump was elected, or right after he was elected, I guess. And Donna Waller is our main civics guru on lectures there. And John Reiskin is running that program. And I did lots of health and lots of community interest stuff. And I've decided it was time for me to remove myself from that since I moved to the village. And so I've turned it over to Star Bradbury and Kathy Striley, who are both great, great people. And I'm sure they'll do a good job carrying on. I feel good about that. My daughter wanted me to move to Jacksonville because living alone out there in the retirement community, my house was starting to fall down and all that kind of stuff. I was contacted by a group in Gainesville that wanted to Asian Place. And while I was living there, that's what I was doing. And we met. We wanted to get a grant from Elder Options to get a navigator to help get vetted services and stuff. And then I decided to move. My daughter said, "You've got to come to Jackson, Mom. You need more than you got going on there." So I said, "No, I can't leave. Gainesville is my community. You would have to do all my social stuff would have to happen with you. I cannot put that on you, honey. You're concerned about my well-being. That's low priority for me. This is my community." So she suggested, "How about the village, Mom?" And I said, "What a great idea." So, but I had worked at the village right after I retired from the university because I wanted to know what these places were like on the inside, you know, what kind of businesses they are. And I found it very nice. People were happy here. At that time, I think they were about 80 years old when they retired, unless there were health problems. So I worked here for maybe 4 or 5 months on weekends doing nursing. And they did a history of nursing here the other day. And I told them that I had done that. And some guy said, "Well, what took you so long to move in here?" And I said, "I didn't know I was old till I hit 90. You know, life has been good to me. So I taught swimming and exercise classes out at Turkey Creek Forest for 10 years. I realized that I am much better at keeping a commitment if I make it to somebody else than if I tell myself I'm going to do it. I never seem to follow through on what I tell myself. It's what I commit to others that makes a difference, I think. So I think relationships in this world are the most important thing, Paul, that I work hard on. And it takes work. It's like tennis, it's serve and return. Relationships are the most important things, I think. So I'm happy here at the village.
Shirley, now you mentioned with your family, you've had the opportunity to live in different places. At one point, I think you said your daughter wanted you to move to Jacksonville. Why did you decide to stay in Gainesville?
Gainesville is a wonderful community. You can't hardly go anywhere without feeling like you know somebody or somebody notices that they know you. I've done a lot of stuff that's exposed me here in Gainesville with the senior center and with the primetime program. So, a lot of people know who I am that I don't know who they are. But there's a feeling of camaraderie in this town in a lot of ways that you don't replace in a heartbeat, really. So I'm very happy in Gainesville. Why would I want to move from Gainesville? For my health? I have had COPD now for about 20 years. It's getting worse. They tell me it's probably will kill me. Well, I hope it doesn't kill me soon. I would like to stay around for a while. The saddest thing about dying is not being here, not knowing what's going on. I'm a news junkie. I keep the news on all the time. To not know what's happening is not my style. So I do try to stay on top of it. And I grew up, my parents were Baptist. I think that the process of maturing insists that you look at what your parents tried to give you of their values and determine whether you still have those as your own values. It's a hard process. It's looking inward an awful lot. I have decided, I tried the Unitarian Church. I tell the Jewish community here they can adopt me. My religion is now I'm a Zoomist. So I do think that now I believe that it's all physics and chemistry, and we're doing a very destructive job on the planet. And the planet is very angry and heated, and we like to soften that, call it Mother Nature. The planet is upset. But I think we came from nothing, we'll return to nothing. I don't believe in a hereafter. I think that's just a selling point. I have seen an awful lot of very discouraging, powerful, made up things by religions to control people. I do think there's a very valuable social side to it where you can care about your congregation and care about those people, have relationships. But the whole methodology of following a creed and all that kind of stuff, I cannot buy into any longer. So when I first started my psych nursing career, I was on the 8th floor at Shands, and I was so amazed by the number of freshman students that had breakdowns from areas where they had grown up with just their family values and had no idea of the real world till they came to college, and they had no way to handle it. They had no skills. They only knew one way, and they broke down, and they were admitted to Shands for care. And it was very sad to me that they were unable to process that for themselves. So I think processing in your own value system is very important.
Shirley, you've done so much work in so many different areas, but I wonder if we could talk about your work in lifelong learning. I was not really even aware. I mean, I knew about this in the abstract before I came to Gainesville, and then in Gainesville, I met you and found out you were a force in lifelong learning, and people really look to you as a role model. And then, I had never even thought about this before, but I learned over time, and you'll kind of laugh at this, but I mean, that Gainesville was a place that people like the Village, Okamic, other places that people would actually come and retire to because they could stay active in so many different ways. But it didn't always used to be like that. Obviously, there's always an origin, there's always change over time. Can you talk about how like this lifelong learning community that you've been a part of has like grown and developed over the years in this area?
Well, I do think that the ILR at Okamic is a big marketing tool for Okamic. They advertise it around the nation, the Institute of Learning and Retirement. And I worked with it. I did 2 terms on their planning board to develop programs for the ILR. And while I was at the CCOA, and we talked about combining some of the education for seniors, but they were not interested in that. But I learned that seniors are hungering for it. And my own process of continuing to learn, I shared with others. As a matter of fact, I made it known when the cell phones came out, you couldn't be my friend unless you could text me. So I moved people into this kind. You've got to learn. If you're going to be in this world, you've got to learn. So I'm trying to, with Carl Barfield now, do a whole program on understanding artificial intelligence a little bit. It's coming on very fast. It has lots of aspects to it that we don't get. And we get warning signs and we don't know how to deal with it. So he has done a history and how it was developed. And then I have a couple of speakers coming from the university, from journalism, mostly Dr. Shin, and Dr. Jasmine McNeely is coming to talk about the ethics in AI. I have a YouTube that wants to show pros and cons and some of the medical advantages of the immense data collection that AI has that can do analysis way before we can actually see it. And I'm impressed with that, and I think people should know it. I'd like to have a digital navigator here at the Village that we could call and check out things. That's what I'm working toward. I understand that the IT program here is to run the Village, not to help the residents in their understanding, but I'm working to change that. Who knows? Yeah. You gotta keep fighting.
Exactly.
So I will share with you one little thing about living here at the Village. It's not normal living, this is like dorm living in a way. So I have decided it's like living in a skit, and funny things happen. And you could get irritated, you could get, upset. But I don't think of them as upsetness. They become funny parts of my skit. I ran into a lady the other day and she said to me in a very concerned voice, "Are you a prisoner here too?" I said, no, I'm a prisoner of love. I just happen to live here. I got a write up an incident report written on me in the laundry room. These are crazy things. So I just keep adding a skit. Mm. So yeah. So
Nice.
if you don't learn about getting old too, and I think that's what's happened. A lot of people don't pay attention. They just it's like letting a wave wash over and you're dead on the beach if you don't learn how to cope with it and how to figure it out. I took my body for granted till I was 90. It was like my car. It took me everywhere, did everything. Now I'm a full caretaker of my body. Full time, full time. What are you going to do today, body? So it's a different place, a different time. But it's an interesting time we're living in, a scary, scary time.
Yeah.
Oh, scary, scary.
Well, Shirley, in some of the earlier interviews that you did, that I was able to read about, you used the election of Donald Trump in 2016 as a way to kind of, as you were being interviewed, you talked about kind of what you did. And you mentioned civics earlier, civics education. Would you mind talking about like the you mentioned interesting times that we live in, and you also mentioned the crisis that the planet that we have inflicted on the planet, and this sense that Mother Nature is fighting back in some ways. And can you talk about like what your take is on the time that we're living in now?
Well, we happen to be human beings, and we're supposedly the only creatures that think ahead. I think a lot of wrong thinking ahead has happened. I think that, to the world is hard to understand now. We've never seen it or known as much about the whole world as we do right now. I get momentary notices if a guy falls over Niagara Falls. I don't really need to know that, but I get that kind of information. I'm getting it from Palestine. I'm getting it from Africa. I'm getting it from Syria, Iran. I have no way to think about it all. It is overwhelming. It is scary. It looks like we are headed to another big war. There's no way I can see that we're going to talk ourselves out of it. There are too many different power moves. My experience when I lived at Turkey Creek Forest, and I take that as a small model, I was on the long range planning committee for when the homeowners had to turn it over to the community itself. So I was on this long range planning committee. How would we govern ourselves? How would we operate? Myself and another woman, the guy lives here now, Eric Wagner, his mother and I were the only women. And we tried to figure out how to run the place. And the men got overwhelmingly in charge. They were going to run it their way. Well, we had the format, so they tried to follow the format. They got angry, they fought, they pounded the table, they walked out of meetings, they cussed at each other. And finally, women are running it. Women have been voted into running the place. And it's running well up until now. Of course, the communities change. Every about 15, 16 years, they roll over. A new generation moves into a retirement community or any community. So that's tricky for the aging in place people, too. And actually, when I decided to move, I went back to that aging in place group with apologies. I felt so guilty because I was no longer going to be representing them. But I told them, you've got to add to this aging in place until. You have to keep it until, because if you close it, you don't give yourself enough opportunity to maneuver. And I can guarantee you, aging in place, the place you're aging in, is going to age faster than you do and need a lot of repairs just at the time you need some. And you're going to have to figure out which to put your money on. So aging in place won't work. But the men really, and I see that around the world, this testosterone is all about power. I don't care if it's white, black, or green. But some women have it too. And I've seen women come a long, long way with a lot of struggle. You know, I hear nurses all the time say how doctors treated them. I've never been treated that way. I've never been a victim. I've stood up and said, you know, don't talk to me like that. I understand what you're saying. And I really have come to the conclusion you can almost say anything if you frame it so that it is acceptable by the recipient. If whatever you say is going to make them angry or going to make them reject it, you've wasted your breath. If you frame it so they can hear it, it changes the dynamics. And because of that, I do believe in positive confrontation. I do believe that you do need to talk over where you're coming from and explain it in ways that is acceptable to another person. And so framing what you say, I have learned is really very important. I think the French learned that a long time ago. They could do anything they wanted as long as they said it right.
What are some of the other ways, Shirley, that we can, in your opinion, really kind of solve some of what seem to be these intractable problems? You know, early you mentioned Gainesville Rising, for example, is this one example of an important
for all, Gainesville for all, Gainesville for sorry.
Oh, no worries, no worries. Yeah, Gainesville for all. And what are some of the things you see that we should be doing that we're not doing? You mentioned, you know, testosterone, masculinity, you know, kind of running things, but like what would be some like ways to change course? Because obviously we need to change course, but no one really wants to do it seemingly.
I think we are moving further and further in that other direction. I see no way to, in our own country, the people who want to make America great again, to my interpretation, are saying, I want to go back to the older way of living. I don't want to be involved in the world. I want to go back to the way it was. That's what I see them saying when they say make America great again. I want to go back to where I have good memories of. Well, in the meantime, more and more women are going to college. Technology is moving a mile a minute. This divide is only growing bigger and bigger. I see no way that it can reconnect. The vehicle for connecting is not available to my thinking. It has to come sometime. I'm sure the Civil War brought around the same kind of thinking, how we can resolve this. Nobody knew. You know, it's never been resolved, but at the time of the conflict, there had to be conflict. I don't see resolving this. You know, we're going to annihilate each other. We've got the methods now. I don't know. If there's a life after this, maybe we'll meet again. Who knows? So, you know, I say all these things. I wonder how you feel about some of the things that I'm saying, because they're sometimes hard to accept. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, they're hard. I mean, we read each other's comments in newspapers and when we've been interviewed, and it just seems like right now we are kind of, I don't know, spinning the gears and but I think we just continue to just struggle. I mean, that's been my takeaway when I've given talks, and especially what's been happening in Florida in the last several years, and people empowered trying to do the opposite of what, I mean, you're essentially talking about a lifelong search for not just answers, but questions. Are we even asking the right questions? And right now, I think the society, the people that run the place are saying, well, don't ask questions. You know, here's the answers. Why are you asking questions?
Right. Why are you making life complicated? Right. We want it to be simple, right? I mean, you just follow my rules and it's simple, right?
Yeah, back to the earlier days. And I think you totally nailed a big part of the crisis, which is on the one hand, we are a society which moves incredibly quickly. You mentioned AI, technological change. And on the other hand, connected to that is this desire among some to just kind of go back and live in kind of an ossified past. But at the same time, there's a lot of people who are like, I just don't remember that time when things were so great.
I think that more than that, I think Trump has tagged into an unidentified anger in men. And there is really based on the religious idea of the male in charge. There's an underlying thing like that is innate, I think, in many, many men.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, it's not all men, but in many, many men. And that drive for power and ownership and control is outside of their power.
Yeah.
And I think Trump is tied into some of that unidentified.
Yeah, exactly. Well, Shirley, I know I've taken up a lot of your time this morning, and we're going to have more conversations. And I really appreciate you doing the interview and kind of letting folks know in the village that the Proctor program really wants to talk to people. And you, like I told Carl, you can tell people now that we don't bite, and we're just very open-ended in terms of what people want to talk about. We really want to talk about life histories more than anything else. And so I'm just really grateful for your
We
time.
really want to learn from each other. I feel like I ought to interview you now, Paul. I find out more about how you feel about it.
Right. Again, like old Wynn says, yeah, Paul, he's kind of put himself out there and burned all of his bridges. But that's the irony of being an oral historian is I've always been much more interested in listening and learning from people. But as you reach a point where at some point people are like, we need someone to say something, just say anything. Yeah,
Well, I love the way you pick up on certain themes and move them. You are excellent at that, Paul.
Thank you. Well, I learned from some really amazing people, so including you, Shirley, and you have just continuously asked these challenging, difficult questions in our world, and that's what we really need. So,
in my world of skit,
yeah,
it is fun to think of it that way. There are an awful lot of complaining old people, whether they've complained their whole life or just have unhappy now at the place they're in. There's a lot of complaining, and I don't tolerate complaining very well. I think the only thing you have control over is your own attitude. And it's not easy for you to have control over that.
no.
But that's the only thing that is open to you if you want to change something or adjust to something. And I've worked hard. I have ignored using oxygen, and I know I need it for my COPD. And I have tried to change my attitude, so now I'm intentionally friendly toward my oxygen instead of angry with it. So I will wear it today. It's kind of crazy. Yeah. But I have a history of smoking. I love smoking. I would smoke today, Paul, if I had any lungs to do it with. But I think that I have transferred my addiction to cigarettes to my cell phone. Is my buddy. It's with me. It is my company. I can play with it. I can talk to it. I can do it while I'm talking to other people. And I look around at everybody using their cell phone. I think, what a world of smokers we have out there.
We had to channel the addiction into a new tool.
Right. It's better for your lungs. I'm not sure what it's going to do for your heart and head after it's all. I worry about people not learning how to build neurons for memory. I think that's very important. I didn't tell you in my story, my father had Alzheimer's very badly. As a matter of fact, he died with Alzheimer's. And I joined a study in Mayo 25 years ago or so. And I have been going every year for neuropsych testing. So I'm probably the only person in Gainesville that has written credentials that I don't have any cognitive impairment at the moment. And I have willed my brain to Mayo and Jacksonville.
Nice.
If it gets there, fine. If it doesn't get there, I won't know. So what difference?
Well, Shirley, this has been a really, I've learned so much from you, and I'm just real excited. Are you planning to go? I'm trying to think of when we might, what is is Oak Hammock doing the fall dinner at some point? That's one place that we all kind of seem to,
They probably will do a retired luncheon there, retired faculty luncheon. That's what
okay,
they're having their luncheons there. And you're a member of the retired faculty, not quite yet, but maybe you can be.
yes, a junior member, just like I joined, the moment I could join AARP, I joined it, Shirley, and a
They'll
lot of
send
my
information before you're ready.
yeah, a lot of my friends tease me. I'm like, I love Denny's. And so the discount there and all the perks, I was a junior AR.
Deny the senior discount.
Right.
Stupid you are. But think about that, writing a makeup phone number on your check because you just couldn't adjust to retiring and not having an identity.
Yeah,
A lot of professional people have to struggle with that. And
yeah, still do, still
right.
do.